Call the meeting to order. First item is approval of the agenda. We do have one addition, the cereal malt beverage license renewal for Dollar General. We need to need a motion to move that to the consent agenda. That was a late addition. I think they got their license in late. Right.
Pardon me?
They got their license in late for Dollar General. That
Well,
was late.
they got it in before, after the packet was posted.
Okay.
And the cereal malt beverage licenses expire on December 31st. So,
So moved.
Second. Been moved and seconded to add it to the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. Now we need approval of the agenda as amended.
I move we approve the agenda as amended. Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. Next is the consent agenda. Are there any questions or anything on those items? If not, I will entertain a motion.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Anybody here that would like to speak to the public comment section?
I have not received any public comments.
Special reports and presentations. Patty Lenning.
She is not here.
All right.
This is Susan.
Check and then I'll just, if not, I'll read it. Nope. Okay. This is proclamation. States whereas November 21st, 2020, the Baldwin High School girls cheer and dance team won the 4A state championship. Whereas in recognition of the Baldwin High School cheer and dance team, now therefore I, Casey Semino, Mayor of the City of Baldwin City, Kansas, do hereby proclaim December 1st, 2020 to be Baldwin High School cheer and dance team day. So this is in recognition for their state championship win. Seems like we've been doing this every fall.
It's good to keep it going.
And keep it going. We will deliver that, I guess, to the Patty.
Chances are she'll show up in Patty Lenning fashion here, so when it's only 7:02.
All right. Pioneer Cemetery report. Susan.
Yes, but I just wanted to come and thank everyone for their support during this time. I think you might have seen the 4-page thing I just threw together. There's a lot of people to thank, and the problem with putting it on paper is you always tend to forget someone, but I hope I didn't. The only other thing I would add, there's still some money in the treasury with the city to pay for some of the panels, and we might do some other fundraising maybe, or ask for donations, but I'm sure there'll be enough to cover that. And this is, on the back page of where we go from here. So, again, just thank you. I want to thank Glenn, and he's been a good support. I really appreciate his advice and hearing me out. And just the people at the city, Maddie and you guys, so, and Dana. So I think we have another year to go, and some things that we'd be looking for in the future would be to kind of work with getting the prairie kind of in a good place. We'd like to do a winter burn this next winter, but there would be some things that would go along with that. It couldn't be mowed at that time. Mark Campbell with the Grassland Foundation has done a lot of burns around the state, and he would be able to do it. He's would do it for free. And we do all the special precautions that go along with that, notifying the neighbors, the fire department, and everything. And even through this winter, Mark and some of the others will be cleaning out some of the timber that's fallen, because like on the north fence line, it's kind of encroaching on the prairie a little bit, the spring up growth, and so just want to cut that back and line it up again. But, there's a lot of interest in the this project and just the area with its history and the prairie and everything that goes together. So, Baldwin is lucky to have a lot of historical sites and preservation sites. I hope to finish up the getting it on the National Registry too in the next year. So.
Susan, I just want to say thank you. I mean, there's not too many people out there that are willing to put in the type of hours that you have over the years for this project.
Yeah, it's thanks.
And we're just appreciative for all your work out there and
No problem.
what you continue to do, because it's pretty cool.
It's my pleasure. I like to see the progress going. The first phase took a little longer than I wanted, but it got there, so that's all that matters. So. Does anybody have any questions on anything that was listed in the?
I know that Mr. Blanchett, his high school class, has been out there to help clean the space, but also put on their, I'm not sure what they call it, but where they pick a person and stand next to a site and become that person. It's pretty cool to see. So
Yeah, that was really exciting.
Right.
It was a
I'm
lot of fun
hoping
for them.
that will happen again once we're allowed to do things like that. So
Yeah, especially when it's done, maybe doing, and the panels are up and everything, do a little ribbon cutting or whatever.
Right.
It would be kind of fun, but yeah, it's been a
Well,
labor of love, so yeah,
Thank you.
thanks for your support.
You're rare. so-
Thank you.
Okay, sure. All right.
Laura called it.
Guess number 2.
All right.
Well, I've done this before.
Come on in, Patty. Come up here.
Okay.
Read this. We'll read this again. So this is a proclamation for your team, for you and your team, for Winton State. It states, whereas November 21st, 2020, the Baldwin High School girls cheer and dance team won the 4A state championship. Whereas in recognition of the Baldwin High School cheer and dance team, now therefore I, Casey Semino, Mayor of the City of Baldwin City, Kansas, do hereby proclaim December 1st, 2020 to be Baldwin High School cheer and dance team day.
Cool.
So I want to
Thank you so
congratulate
much.
you and your
Thank you.
team, and you're the second recipients of one of these this year. So
Awesome. Yeah.
Keep it up.
We're having a good year. Thank you so much. I appreciate
thank
it.
you. You want to stand?
Pardon? Do you want me? Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
she
gonna
wants
do
to
this
take
as well.
There you go.
COVID picture.
No, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Patty.
guys.
We're so used to this now.
I know.
Roll to the side.
All right. Old business, wastewater treatment plant funding update. This is something the council approved at the last meeting. There are some changes, some updates, and we talked about them in the finance committee, so I'm going to throw it to Scott to kind of give a synopsis of that.
Yeah, so as you recall, the last council, we had a discussion on kind of an emergency replacement of that programmable logic controller. And we approved, I think, 146K or something to do that. And as we walked through the budget, you remember we had some discussion around what was really in there and what was part of the bond stuff. So it turns out that there was a mistake, and we actually didn't have the $500,000 in that reserve fund or improvement fund. It was actually only the 69,000 that was referenced somewhere else. So, Glenn brought that to our attention. Obviously, we ran it by in the finance committee, talked to, Ben in the, from Baker Tilly, and, it's still obviously doable. The plan we came up with is to just borrow the difference that's not in the fund from the electric utility. And then we'll have to refund that, pay that back from the wastewater utility back to the electric. So obviously that brought up an additional discussion around making sure that our separate utilities are solvent, which is not really the correct word, but they have enough in their funds to operate with some additional funding to support these types of things. So I think a couple lessons learned. I mean, Glenn caught it right away. I think had we talked about this in the Budget and Finance Committee prior to voting, I think we would have probably discussed it, and Ben or somebody might have caught it at that point. So I know we rushed to this because there was a need. So it speaks to, hey, sticking to the process if we can. And two, back to how we look at those numbers, making sure that we recognize, what is actually already, bond money already targeted at something, already spent or encumbered, and kind of figure out a way to remove that, so when we look at these numbers, we can see what actually is left and isn't encumbered to be spent on a bond. So it just kind of reinforces maybe displaying the budget in a different way will catch these things, it'll be easier to talk about. So I think the big news out of this is, hey, we've got to really look at our utilities and figure out where we're at with them, with the reserve funds in each one. There's a whole myriad of ways we can go about looking at this, but first thing is paying back the electric utility with the plan from the wastewater, and maybe rate increases and maybe something else. But we got to come up with a plan for that. And, the whole gamut of we talked briefly about collapse all for utilities into one. You just collapse the improvement reserves into one. There's a whole bunch of things you can do. There's pros and cons with each one of those, right? So transparency is the big thing the big negative of putting them all together. It would actually require us to be more transparent on the balance sheet, if you will, because the funds would be basically commingled, and we'd have to be clear of what the inflows and outflows were for each fund. So it causes its own issue. So the bottom line is, and it's on the agenda for the next Budget and Finance Committee, is to start talking about, recovering the wastewater utility, a reserve fund, figuring out how we're going to do that, and really looking at all of the funds, the rate structures, and maybe methodologies on how do we handle increased costs going forward. We talked briefly about that. Is it a base fee? Is there a cost of living increase every year? So it's back to that old discussion nobody wants to have, is how do we make sure we're charging an appropriate amount to make sure we can grow the utilities like they need to be grown. So it'll be a multi-month discussion, and all the input needs to come in, and we need to share and kind of ideate on how we do that. But I think this is kind of brought this to the front where it's time to talk about it and figure out a plan on how we move forward. So I'll pause for questions, or you want to add to that, Glenn or Casey?
No, I think you hit it on that. You hit it on the head. It's going to lead to a larger discussion. And we started kind of down this road. I think Susan was on the finance committee. I know we talked about it in the council on a couple work sessions about putting those funds together. And at that time, again, the discussion was it's not as transparent. It's hard to follow that dollar, from the electric fund, let's say, because that's our healthiest fund as far as utilities, all the way through to what's it helping pay for. So we've had that discussion, very surface level, but I think it's time that we need to take a deeper look into these and either come up with a plan like that to where, hey, this is how we're going to collapse them all into one, or come up with a long-term plan for all our utilities. So every year or every 5 years or every 10 years, it doesn't continue to be a big issue, that it's just already nice and planned out for the community and for everybody's just for budgetary reasons for every family in our community to plan it. So
Right. And we also need to figure out what that number is for each utility, and what a healthy reserve amount is.
Sure.
And that's, the rates will determine a lot of that. But then kind of, where do you stop? What transfers out?
technically, we have an ordinance on the books that outlines that, I believe.
I'm sure we do, but maybe.
It's a policy, though.
A policy.
We
Sorry,
have- It's
policy.
a reserve fund policy.
Reserve fund policy.
But just looking at that again.
But
making
it's
sure we're still where
it's
we
all
need to be.
interrelated. Really, I think it's 25%. Is it just a general, or is it all the utility?
It's all the funds.
Okay,
The
so
reserve,
the policy is 25%, right? So roughly 4 million, I'm just round numbering it, as a reserve for the city, that would allow the city to operate if theoretically all the utilities, which is the big revenue stream, go down. You need to operate, and that would support us for about 4 months. And that's the typical recommendation, but, it's not set in stone. So part of the transition plan, I'm just, things we need to think about is, we could draw down on a reserve to a 3-month reserve, use that $1 million to, on a long-range plan, offset the impact of potential rate increases that we need to get the reserve funds, for each utility back where they need. So it's kind of a savings account. You can use it to soften the blow and then build it back if you want to get back to the 25%, or just have a different policy of where you want to operate the city at from a reserve. So it is a discussion we need to have, because it's all related to how we use the revenues that we have from the citizens.
So in a nutshell, that's what the finance committee will be working on.
Yeah. There is no, it has to be this collective body. It will be questions around with the, the mayor and the staff, of what are we comfortable with? Are we comfortable with running a lower reserve forever, for a period of time, or stay where we're at? And those are kind of fundamental ways you can look at it. And then if so, what does that mean from a rate structure to deliver the reserves that we all agree we'll want to have in these utilities? It's almost fairly straightforward on how we have to do that. With cost of living increases around materials that are going up every year to run these utilities, how do we do that?
And staffing.
And staffing, yeah, which is the biggest part of all that is, cost of living for people running the utilities. So having a plan on how you do that, I think would be great. And future councils can change it. There could certainly be a baseline of here's a suggestion we think is fair and equitable across for all the citizens. And it'd be great, if this council could come up with something that we think would work over the long term.
Yeah, I just don't like continually doing the short-term fixes on utilities. I'd rather have a long-term game plan, whether that's a 10-year plan and this is how we're going to go each year, and it just happens fluidly, versus 10 years and hope we're here's a 20% increase on our citizens. That's not appropriate either. So I think it'd be prudent for us to sit down, and it'll probably end up in a work session.
Yeah.
For sure.
Multiple.
Yeah.
It's complex. I mean, there is no right answer. It's really what you want to do and how you want to operate, how the city wants to operate.
We can get into this, in the next few meetings as we talk about it, but it seems like, if I'm not mistaken, that the wastewater fund is actually in better shape than it was a couple years ago, Glenn, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's gone back down now. I mean, like
Oh.
I said, in cash, we've only got about $70,000, and that
Yeah,
was a
'cause-
mistake I made at the last meeting.
A few years ago, the last council bonded for the sewer project, but they didn't
Right.
start paying for that sewer project, so.
The
that's
big
kind of-
chunk was
Yeah,
sitting
What
there,
we
like we
saw was
talked
that
about.
bond money sitting there, but it was already encumbered to go pay for the
Right.
project. So if we peel that out, we would have clearly seen the 69,000. And we did fairly soon after. we
Yeah,
did it.
the next
So it
day.
wasn't- So it just gets down to, I think, just really how we present this. And it helps us internally. All of us, when we look at it, go, oh, we know exactly what that $500,000, it doesn't show up as a $500,000 on the report we saw. It was like, it's
Mhm.
450,000 already earmarked for this, and it's, 50,000 that we have available.
Right.
And you make a decision go on. So it's a process.
And if I remember right from the discussion, we'll leave that 60-some thousand in the wastewater fund and borrow the full amount from the electric. But I think you should have some reserve still in the.
Well, yeah, I don't know, we talked about that. I think it's,
Well, if we use all that, we'll be really thin on the wastewater, thanks, for whatever reason, because of all these things that are happening, it has been
Right.
declining this year. It just has been, so.
we have two routes to go.
Yeah.
Right.
You take it all, the delta, the 80K, and you zero out the wastewater. If you have another event, you borrow more. I mean, it's a matter of, you do one event or two,
Right.
or multiple ones. I don't know that it really matters. I mean, I think whatever Glenn's comfortable with, I think makes sense.
Yeah,
'Cause
That's
it's-
something we need to talk about, I think, as a committee. So
Well, I think, but for simplicity purposes, it would be better probably to borrow all of it, because just the way that our
Just to
employees are
account
paid,
for it,
I mean,
yeah.
because every pay period, then that's gonna deplete and deplete and deplete, and then we're gonna be transferring to trying to keep it.
Well, it'd still potentially be only one borrow. If we didn't need anything else from the reserve for the rest of the year, we wouldn't have to go back and borrow any more, so it'd be an $80,000 loan from the electrical utility that we would pay back.
Yeah, if
To
you're,
your point, that's fine. We can
yeah,
probably,
if
yeah, I
you're,
agree.
if you're projecting that it stays at current levels, but what we've seen over the last few years with it's been declining each year, just
Yeah.
small amounts, small increments, but it has been in a slow decline.
So I think, yeah, I agree. I think the point is, it doesn't replenish at January 1, right? We're still at zero, and however it's built up based on the monthly utilities coming in. So
Yeah, correct.
just to have something in there, it makes sense to do that.
Any other comments or questions on that? All right, budget and finance, Scott.
So we talked about that a little bit. I just would say I appreciate the way Glenn handled it. Hey, solved the problem, notified, we corrected it. And I will say that we would have come to the exact same decision had we known anyway. It was an emergency need. So appreciate you finding it as soon as you did. So we talked about really the pros and cons about collapsing utilities that will continue to go on as part of the whole process. I think we also talked about funding sources for construction and ongoing operation and maintenance costs of the proposed community center in the Bower building. So we discussed the mechanism there. Obviously the work session was addressed around that, but sources include obviously gifts, grants, sales tax, property tax, mill levy, and user fees, right? It could be one or multiple of those sources to actually fund what needs to be done. I think that's going to be the ongoing. I think the advisory committee recommended half-cent sales tax. I think the question remains, how much does that fund? Is it sunset after a period of years? What happens after that from an operational perspective? Do we reduce it then? Do we keep it there and compile more funds for quality of life amenities that are still on the list? So a whole bunch of decisions will have to be made. But I think what we need to look at are all those potential resources or revenues to figure out, do we just use one or do we look at multiple? And I know we talked a lot about grants. Would be one way to reduce the size of the sales tax need and or excess of the half cent going into quality of life amenities. We talked about that. I think that was it for that meeting. We're meeting Thursday, 7:45. Obviously, we'll be talking about the utility piece and see what else we had on that real quick.
Ordinance.
Oh, thank you. I'm just going to get there. So we're going to revisit I think it was called the bond utility ordinance. And I don't know if it was,
Spending.
yeah, so I think a lot of us, the council obviously knows this, the prior council members and those of us that were campaigning or running sat through some of this, but it was the ordinance that really would require identifying the funding source for any bond that was let as part of the process in that, hey, if we're going to go get a $4 million bond to do, wastewater or a substation, then we have to put in the budget, have to identify where that we'll know what the payback stream looks like. We'll know what the bond payments will be. We'll need to identify where those are coming from over the next 20 years of 20-year bond. So to kind of make sure that we don't saddle future councils with unexpected payments that weren't in the budget or in the previous budget. So it's really just kind of a fiscal good policy to try to do that. And I think as a council, we do that, and prior councils may have done that. But just making it an ordinance, I think just put some guidelines around it, how that's done. And then in my opinion, what it does is if a future council doesn't think it's a good idea to change that ordinance, then they really need to discuss in open session why they don't believe that it's a good policy. So we may not have thought of all the reasons not to do it, and future council certainly could change it to rescind it, but it would require this discussion of why. Similar to what we're going to have of why we think we should or shouldn't do it. That's the second piece of the agenda, and I think that was all I had.
I think that's it on your agenda.
Your meeting on Thursday instead of Friday,
Yeah, Thursday at 7:45.
the 17th.
Community Development, Corey.
We met yesterday. Just had a couple things that we discussed. First, we ran the Bower Building discussion through CDC. Kind of got some feedback from our citizen committee member, and decided I think everything checks off at the CDC level, and it'll be ready to go to council to present. We also discussed the Main Street program. There's I think, is it January deadline?
Yeah, I think it's the end of January, so
So
it's
it's-
application.
Kind of talked about where we're at there and in that process, and I think we're moving along quite nicely as far as that goes and in the right direction. So next time we meet, December 28th at 4.
Public Safety, Sue.
No updates since the last meeting. Meet next December 8th.
Julie, Public Works.
At our last meeting, we had a consulting engineer come in and talk to us regarding the installation of a new substation. It's just a preliminary presentation at that point, just to give us some information about what it would be. COVID has been causing problems for the departments as far as to get parts. For example, they ordered 8 to 10 weeks ago for transformers and electric meters, and that was in June, and they still haven't received them, so it's kind of slowing down a lot of the different departments of the utilities. As well as reported previously, they were going to be getting parts from Bolton. That has now been moved back. Not sure to when, just depending on the COVID situation. The roof on the downtown power plant should be finished. It was going to be finished by December 1, and that would be today, so I haven't heard any update on that. The pool panels also have been a COVID holdup, so they haven't gotten those in yet. We've also discussed a possible ordinance for the cable companies, and I asked the department heads to please give us a list of priorities so that the council can work on the needs when we're working on the city strategic plan. And then I'd like to add that I toured the substation, the power plant, and the wastewater department this morning, and was totally amazed at how they take care of the city. I'd like to thank Jeff and Steve for doing the tours and for Lynn for filming. And she's going to be putting it on the website, on Twitter, and on Facebook. And I would encourage everyone to view it because it really gives you an idea of the back of the city, basically, on what all they do. And they explained it really well, even for me to understand a lot of it. Not all of it, of course. But I find it amazing how much knowledge, time, and commitment the employees that are in the Public Works Department have. Also, their willingness to do a lot of the in-house repairs and installation of equipment that saves the city a lot of money. And after going on the tours today, I don't think the citizens realize what it takes to keep the city running. And I would like to say thank you to all of the city Public Works employees. And our next meeting is December 17th at 9 o'clock.
Now I'm just going to expand on the substation side of that, because that's going to end up being a big issue coming up here in the next year. The engineer right now is looking at basically, do we do one big substation? Do we do two smaller substations located on the east side and the west side? And how do we do that? So there were some recommendations given back to the engineer on if we did the two. I had some suggestions on just placement of it so it didn't take away from future commercial, hopefully, areas in town. But it was very, just the time and work that they've put into that already. There's going to be a lot of decisions coming from this body, because it's not only do we pay for that, it's where do we locate it at and what's the best spot to locate it at later on. So again, that's probably going to have to be a work session, agenda item for this body when it gets closer to being completed. And then, Laura, regarding the ordinance, we had a citizen request for burying cable lines, whether that's telephone cable, and the amount of time that they get to bury those. So that's what the committee is looking at now, and doing the research on what other communities around our area, what did their ordinance look like, and what is all that. So that's what they're looking at right now. And I think Julie's already communicated with Blake to have him come to a committee meeting, so he can kind of understand
That's where I was going.
what she's looking for. So
And I did email the city manager in Eudora, but I have not heard back from him.
then you might ask Barack, but
Yeah, I can reach out to him. We know him very well and his staff over there, so they'd be able to provide us with that information at some point on their policy.
and Laura has access to the listserv, so she can actually send out to all city clerks to pull their ordinances from all the
That'd be
communities.
great.
Yeah, it's usually the
That'd save a
most
lot of
efficient.
I was gonna say, if you want to call all the
Yeah.
cities, and
It works fairly well.
Yeah.
Does.
you'll probably get at least 30 to 50 responses back
Okay.
with actual
Hopefully.
ordinances.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd save me a lot of time.
So, yeah, if you have those kind of questions or whatever about policy, whatever, I'm on a listserv, Dora's on a listserv, and all the cities are very good at responding to those questions. Oh, it's all right, yeah, leave out Blake, he's on the city attorney listserv.
That looks
So,
like he's getting ready
Yeah.
to fall asleep back there.
Right, great thing about Kansas, all small cities support each other, and so, nobody reinvents the wheel if we don't have to, so we borrow from each other. It's highly encouraged actually in local government. So if you have some of those questions, just ask, and we usually get, within 24 hours, dozens of responses from people, so.
Good.
Awesome.
All right, legislative committee, Brian.
No update. Looks like we are on tap to meet Wednesday the 16th, 8 o'clock.
Staff comments?
Yeah, two things. One you may have noticed, I don't know, if you come into the town from the west side in the past day, you notice that our sign on the west side, our city sign is actually lit. Evergy energized that, and if you remember, we had to do that one by solar because that's not near any city power like the east side was. So now we have one on the east, one on the west, I believe they're identical or pretty close to being identical, and they're both lit. So you see them at night, and I think they look absolutely fantastic, but that's just me. So that's the good news. It took them a while to do that. Some of their crews had also come down with COVID, and so that delayed their response to our request to get that lit up there, but it looks like they finally got there. So anyway, if you're driving on town and see that some night, you're not hallucinating. We do have a sign up there, and it is lit at night, so it looks fantastic, just in time for holiday season, I guess. Speaking of which, if you haven't been downtown during this past one, we got everything lit up downtown. We add to it every year, as you probably noticed, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Our Brown guys who are doing this, I think it's their third year that we've been with them. They've added more, and they're very responsive. They're very good at what they do, and our downtown was second to none, I think, in the state of Kansas. So that's good news there. Speaking of downtown, one thing I've noticed since I've lived in Baldwin City is we don't have any bike racks downtown. I don't know when the last time we did. So I was talking with Ed Corton about that a few months ago. He said, no problem. There's grant money available through the Community Foundation here in Douglas County. We want to apply for a grant, so we did. And here this last week, we were awarded $3,700, which would give us 4 or 5 bike racks we could put downtown. So, and they should look pretty sturdy, and they'll last for a long time. So.
Will they be black?
I think so, yeah. I think to match the other things we got down there, but I haven't really seen what we're gonna get yet. And I think it's kind of up to us what type we want to put down there, but we've
Put
always
Christmas
lacked
lights on?
them for whatever.
No, I
reason.
just match our railings and our light
Yeah,
poles.
we
Black
have a
would
lot
be-
of, right, we have a lot
Yes.
of black downtown as far as our benches and, our trash bins and everything else down there. So we'll keep a consistent look with that. So they did notify us, through their Live Well Community Wellness Program that they gave us $3,700 for bike racks downtown. So we appreciate that. I mean, so anyway, good news all the way around there. See?
I do have one more thing I'd like you to just give the council a little update on. Is the power outages. We saw this last weekend. You
Okay.
got to give an update on.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what I know, because it's still being investigated right now. There's really two possibilities to why. I mean, it's a voltage drop is what they call us, and the folks are out there touring the plant here about that today. We had one substation, so when the voltage drops, it trips the breakers and the town is out. Will a new substation, what they told us this morning is if you have two substations, you can isolate that one and reroute the power to the other. So if we had another substation, you could bring it back online. The reason it's a delay though is because we don't know exactly what caused it. You don't go down there and just energize the city back on it, because it could have been an accident, it could have been a power line down somewhere, and if you then just send out power, you could potentially harm somebody out there. So they have to go through, a process where they check and go back and find. And what seems to be causing it is voltage is dropping, and is it on our side or is it on the outside, which is Evergy's line coming in? We had some outside engineers come in first thing Monday morning, and they checked all our equipment. They're pretty sure we're pretty solid on our side. There is a possibility that there is something with our transformer or with our switchgear somehow, but we're thinking it's probably on the other side. To their credit, Evergy has had multiple engineers and crews looking at their substations that come into town, and they're tracing the problem and trying to find why that voltage is dropping. And it seems to be at a certain hour it does that. I don't know why, but it's usually early in the morning that voltage drops, and then our town is knocked offline because of that. So right now we're going to wait for their report to come in. So we're doing what we can on our side to trace what the problem could be, and I know they are too, and they've had, like I said, an army of people out there looking at it right now. So we're a high priority for them, because they don't want to see towns get blacked out in the middle of the night or the day or whatever time it is.
Well,
So,
and I'm going to add a little bit to that, just based off of what I heard from citizens and stuff, and I'm sure all the council knows this, but for the citizens listening, we buy our power is bought, so it's transmitted into town. So if something's wrong on their side, and our power gets cut off, that's why we have our generation, our own generation, so we can generate ourselves if it's going to be out for hours upon hours, like we saw, I think 2 summers ago, where everybody around us was out for multiple days and we were still in Baldwin generating our own power. Obviously the solar we don't have batteries, so the solar, we use that power as it generates right here in our community, but that's the only power that we generate that we're using on a day-to-day basis. The generators are only fired up if that transmission line coming into our town is having problems at some point. So just a real quick synopsis of that on there. I know everybody here knows that, but I also want the citizens to hear that too, because I think there's some misconception that we generate our own power all the time, and that's not the case. We purchase our power and it's transmitted into our town. With that, any council comments? Oh,
I wanted to mention today, Glenn and I worked together on the Flory paperwork, the title work, and closed on that deal and went to Lawrence and picked up the check. This is that property that is on the highway. You all recall that started like in July, I think?
right, and that's where Mr. Flory owns the car wash, and he's currently dismantling that, but he will be building on our site. That's on the east side of town.
do we know when Casey's is breaking ground?
I don't. They've been a little bit delayed. I believe they're still on target to construct this winter and be open in the spring. That's
So they're
typically how
looking
they
at
do
opening
that.
April, May?
Yeah,
timeframe?
that's typically how they do that. I've seen them do it before. They'll pour concrete and do all their construction over the winter time, believe it or not, be ready to open. So, but yeah, it's been a little bit of a delay on their part, and I'm not sure exactly why, but I think they're still within their time frame that they're looking at.
Any council comments?
I have one. On our tour today, the power plant, Jeff was mentioning how, over the past 12 months, I think he said 56%
Yeah, I
of
was
our
just gonna-
power
I was
was
just gonna
from
mention
renewable
that.
energy. So that was a jump from, I believe, a couple of years ago, we were at 30 something, and that could go down too,
I think 32.
right? Given the agreements that will expire in a couple of years here, but
And he
that's pretty
said,
impressive.
he said that was better than Lawrence does.
I think it's,
I think that's up there in the state of Kansas. That's impressive.
we were proud with the 30
Right,
something
yeah.
percent. So that was impressive too.
Yeah.
56% over the last 12 months is amazing.
Any other comments? Not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes, we're adjourned.